The wind cut through the empty white world like knives. Snow swirled across the barren plain, erasing every trace of life. The alien woman pulled her thin cloak tighter, but it was useless. The cold was in her bones, in her breath, in her heart. She had been walking for days, exiled from her people, cast out into this endless winter. Her name was Lyra. She had once lived in tall, shining cities, but now she was nothing more than a shadow wandering the wasteland. Pride had carried her this far, pride and anger, but even pride was no shield against the cold. Ahead, she saw a small fire flickering. A strange shape moved near it, bending over the flames. Lyra narrowed her eyes. She expected another scavenger, maybe a beast. But when she drew closer, she saw something stranger, something small, wrapped in rough cloth, with eyes too bright for such a fragile body. It was a human. Humans were not common here. They were wanderers, traders, always moving between worlds. She had heard stories of their strange ways, their weakness, their persistence. She had never thought she would meet one out here in the frozen emptiness. The human looked up. He was young, with tired eyes but a steady smile. He did not seem surprised to see her. Instead, he moved a little to the side of the fire and said softly, "Cold night, isn't it?" Lyra frowned. She wanted to tell him to leave her alone. She wanted to keep walking, to prove she needed no one. But the warmth of the fire touched her skin, and her body betrayed her pride. She sank down near the flames, wrapping her cloak tighter. They sat in silence. The fire cracked. The snow hissed against the stones. After a long time, the human spoke again. "Name's Daniel. I've been walking for a while. What about you?" She turned her head away. "I am no one." Daniel studied her face. He saw the lines of hunger, the shadows of exhaustion. He didn't press her for more. Instead, he pulled out a small piece of dried food and placed it between them. "Eat. You look like you need it." Lyra stared at the food. Her stomach ached, but her pride resisted. Still, hunger won. She ate slowly, and for the first time in days, she felt a little strength return. Night came quickly. The fire grew weaker. The cold pressed in harder than before. Lyra shivered, though she tried to hide it. Daniel glanced at her, then at the sky heavy with frost. "This fire won't last the night," he said. Lyra's teeth chattered. "I can endure." But her body shook, her voice weak. Daniel frowned. He leaned closer. "You'll freeze, we both will." She snapped at him, her pride breaking under the weight of fear and cold. Her voice was sharp, desperate, almost a shout. "Shut up, human. We're freezing. Get in my bed now." The words hung in the frozen air. Daniel blinked, startled, then laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because it was the first time she had admitted she needed someone. He nodded, pulled his blanket wide, and sat close beside her. Their bodies pressed together, sharing what little warmth they had. Lyra felt his human heartbeat, steady against her trembling. She hated the weakness in herself, yet she could not deny the comfort. For the first time since her exile, she did not feel completely alone. Hours passed. The fire died, but their warmth remained. Lyra closed her eyes and listened to the quiet breath of the human beside her. She thought of her people, far away, and how distant she felt from them now. She thought of how strange it was that a human, one she had met only hours ago, was closer than anyone else in this frozen world. She did not know how to reconnect with the life she had lost. She did not know if she ever could. But lying there, warmed by another's stubborn heart, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. In the end, survival was not about pride or strength. It was about connection, about holding on even when everything tried to tear you apart. And as the snow buried the world outside, the alien woman whispered the words again, softer this time, almost like a memory. The storm had passed, but silence was worse than the roar of the wind. Snow covered the cave mouth, muting every sound. Inside, the alien woman, Lyra, sat with her arms wrapped tight around her knees. The human, Daniel, was busy gathering small twigs and broken pieces of frozen moss to feed the weak fire. They had survived the night, but survival came with an unexpected cost. Distance. Lyra kept her eyes on the fire, refusing to look at Daniel. She remembered the heat of his body against hers, how it had kept her alive. The memory burned in her mind like a secret shame. She had shouted at him, ordered him close, and he had obeyed. It had saved them both, yet now she felt an invisible wall between them. Daniel noticed her silence. He wanted to say something to ease the weight pressing on both of them, but words seemed fragile in the cold. Instead, he poked the fire and said quietly, "We should move soon. Storms never wait long here." Lyra nodded, but gave no answer. When they stepped outside, the world was white and endless again. Their footprints vanished almost as soon as they made them. They walked close together, but a gulf had grown in their hearts. For hours, the only sound was the crunch of snow under their boots. At last Daniel tried again. "Back there in the cave, I hope you don't feel ashamed. You did what anyone would have done." Lyra's head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing. "I am not ashamed." But her voice cracked, betraying her. She looked away quickly, hiding her expression. She felt sad. Sad because she had needed him. Sad because she had pushed him away. She had once cared for people back in her city, but when they exiled her, she learned that closeness only brought pain. Now here was this human, too close for comfort yet too far for her pride to reach. Daniel sighed. "All right, then I'll say this. I don't regret it. You saved me as much as I saved you." His words echoed in her ears long after he fell silent. That night, they built another shelter of stone and ice. The fire burned weak, but enough. They sat apart at first, one on each side, staring into the flames. Lyra's thoughts were heavy. She wanted to speak. She wanted to say thank you, or at least admit she didn't hate his company, but the words stayed locked inside. She felt distant, even though he was only a few feet away. Daniel broke the silence. "I once knew someone," he said softly. "Back on my world. She moved far away. I cared for her. I thought distance would not matter, but it did. I kept waiting for the right way to reach her, the right time. I never found it. She became just a memory." Lyra finally looked at him. His face was calm, but his voice carried sadness. "Now I think," he continued, "maybe the mistake was waiting too long. Maybe the right time is just now." His words struck her. She thought of her people, the ones who had cast her aside. She had cared for them once, even loved them. Now she was far away, and the distance felt like death. She wanted to reconnect, but she didn't know how. The human's story mirrored her own feelings. His hope touched something deep in her heart. She lowered her eyes. "When I was exiled, I thought I would die alone. I thought no one would ever speak to me again. I told myself I didn't care." Her voice shook. "But I did care, I still do." Daniel gave a small smile. "Then you already know. Distance doesn't have to last forever." The fire crackled between them, a bridge of warmth. Slowly, Lyra moved closer, until they shared the light instead of keeping it separate. The wall between them began to fade. The days that followed were still hard. The cold never relented, and food was always scarce. But the silence between them was different. Now, it was no longer a wall, it was a quiet bond. They walked together, shared small jokes, even laughed once or twice when the snow collapsed on Daniel's head while he was digging for roots. Each moment carried a fragile hope, like tiny sparks in the ice. One evening, as the sky glowed faintly green with northern lights, Lyra whispered, "Perhaps exile is not the end. Perhaps it is only a path to something else." Daniel looked at her, his eyes warm. "That's what humans believe. No door stays closed forever." For the first time, she believed it too. And as they lay down near the fire that night, The memory of her desperate words came back, no longer sharp with shame but soft with meaning. She realized that what had begun as an order had become the beginning of connection. A human had stood beside her when no one else would. That was not weakness. That was hope. She closed her eyes, and before sleep claimed her, she repeated the words not as anger, not as desperation, but as a strange kind of comfort. The days of walking turned into weeks. The wasteland did not grow softer, but the silence between Lyra and Daniel slowly changed. They spoke more now, not much, but enough to share their thoughts in small pieces. Still, a space lingered between them, a quiet distance that neither knew how to cross. At night, they shared warmth by the fire, but during the day Lyra often walked ahead, her shoulders stiff. Daniel followed a few steps behind, watching her back, sensing she carried burdens heavier than the cold. He remembered her words in the cave, that she cared, though she tried to hide it. He wanted to reach her, to help her feel less alone. Yet, he did not know how. One evening, after a long march through endless snow, they found a valley with sharp black rocks jutting from the white ground. The wind screamed through the gaps, but in the middle stood a hollow where they could make camp. Daniel gathered sticks and frozen moss, while Lyra shaped stones into a low wall to block the wind. They worked without speaking, both tired, both guarded. When the fire finally lit, they sat across from each other, their shadows dancing on the rock walls. The silence stretched too long. Daniel cleared his throat. You ever think of going back? To your people? Lyra's hands tightened around her cloak. They cast me out. I spoke against their law. They said I was unworthy. Her eyes were sharp, but her voice trembled. There is no going back. Daniel stared into the fire. On my world, sometimes we lose people too. They move far away. Sometimes it feels like exile, like they've closed the door and you're left outside. Her gaze flicked toward him. Did you lose someone? He nodded slowly. Yes. I cared for her, but she moved on. I thought maybe she'd come back one day, but she never did. His voice grew quiet. I never told her how much she mattered, and now she's gone. Lyra felt the ache in his words. She knew that ache. It was the same hollow space inside her chest. She wanted to say something, but pride caught her tongue. Instead, she turned her face toward the flames, hiding the sadness in her eyes. Daniel leaned forward, his voice firm. But here's the thing about humans. We keep trying. Even when doors close, even when people walk away, we keep hoping for another chance. For a long time, Lyra said nothing, yet something inside her shifted. The next morning, the snow fell softer, almost gentle. They walked side by side instead of apart. Lyra pointed out the tracks of a beast in the snow, showing Daniel how to tell if it was near. Daniel shared dried food and explained how humans used salt to keep it good for long journeys. It was small, ordinary sharing, but it felt like the first true step toward closeness. Still, at night, when she lay awake by the fire, Lyra thought of her people. She remembered faces she had once cared for, voices she might never hear again. The distance ached like frost in her chest. She wanted to reach back across that distance, but she didn't know how. Daniel noticed her quiet sorrow. He didn't push, but he stayed close, offering small kindnesses. A joke about the way his boots froze stiff overnight. A story about humans, building homes in deserts where nothing should live. Each story carried hope, the kind of hope that said survival was not enough. Connection was worth fighting for. One afternoon, as they crossed a frozen river, the ice cracked beneath Daniel's foot. He slipped, plunging into the freezing water. Lyra shouted his name and rushed forward, pulling him out with all her strength. His teeth chattered, his body shaking violently. Without thinking, she wrapped him in her cloak, pressing close to keep him warm. The distance between them vanished in that moment. Her hands trembled as she held him, but her heart felt stronger. You saved me, Daniel whispered through the cold. She shook her head. No, we saved each other. Again. When they finally reached the safety of a cave and lit a fire, Lyra sat close beside him. She did not pull away. Her thoughts returned to the words she had once shouted, full of pride and shame. Now they echoed in her mind differently, not as a command but as a reminder of how fragile and powerful connection could be. That night, under the glow of the fire, she whispered so softly that Daniel almost didn't hear. The snow had eased, for several days. For once, the sky showed hints of pale blue instead of endless gray. Lyra and Daniel walked through a forest of frozen trees, their branches heavy with ice. Each step crunched softly, the silence broken only by the whisper of wind. To anyone watching, they might have seemed like true companions, walking side by side. Yet inside Lyra's heart, a deep distance remained. Every time she looked at Daniel, she felt two things at once: gratitude and shame. Gratitude because he had saved her more than once. Shame because she needed him at all. In her people's world, weakness was unforgivable. Asking for help was dishonor. That was why she had been exiled, because she had spoken against traditions that crushed the weak. She had shouted for change, for mercy, and for that she had been cast out. Now, with every step beside this human, she wondered, was she proving her people right? That she could not stand alone? That night, as the fire glowed faintly, Lyra sat apart, her back to the wall of stone. Daniel sat opposite, repairing a strap on his pack. He noticed her silence, the way her eyes avoided his. "You're quieter than usual," he said softly. She didn't answer at first, but the weight inside her grew too heavy to hold. "I keep thinking," she whispered at last, "that I was right to fight them. But now I am here, alive only because of you. It feels like I have become what they accused me of, weak." Daniel put the strap aside. He studied her carefully, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "You think needing someone is weakness?" Her shoulders stiffened. "It is what they taught us." He leaned closer to the fire. "Then they were wrong. Where I come from, no one survives alone. We build families, villages, cities. We keep each other alive. If that is weakness, then it is the kind that has carried us across worlds." His words struck her deep and sharp. She had never heard anyone speak of need as strength. She turned her gaze to the flames. "And yet, if you had not been here, I would have frozen. Doesn't that prove I am less?" Daniel shook his head. "No, it proves you are alive, and alive means you still have a chance to shape tomorrow." For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. Inside her chest, old shame battled with new understanding. She thought of her people far away, still clinging to cruel laws. She wanted to reconnect with them, to show them a different way. But she didn't know how. That night, sleep did not come easily. She lay close to the fire, hearing Daniel's slow breathing nearby. Her mind replayed his words again and again. No one survives alone. The next morning, the forest ended, opening into wide plains of snow. The wind returned, sharp and bitter. Lyra pulled her cloak tight, walking ahead, her thoughts heavy. Halfway across the plain, Daniel stumbled. His boot caught on hidden ice and he fell hard. He winced, clutching his ankle. Lyra rushed to him, kneeling at his side. "Can you stand?" He tried, but his face twisted with pain. Not without help. Without hesitation, Lyra slid under his arm, supporting his weight. Together they limped across the snow until they found a cluster of rocks where they could rest. As they sat, Daniel smiled weakly. "See? Even humans need someone sometimes." Lyra stared at him, the truth settling in her heart. He was right. If needing someone was weakness, then they were both weak, and yet somehow together they were stronger. That evening, as the sun sank behind the frozen horizon, Lyra spoke again. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You asked if I think of going back. The truth is yes, every day. I want to stand before them again. I want to tell them I was not wrong. But the distance between us feels endless." Daniel looked at her with gentle eyes. Distance is not the same as the end. Maybe they won't listen, maybe they will. But if you still want to reach them, then you already carry hope. And hope is stronger than exile. Her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had given her permission to believe her heart still mattered. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "Perhaps I am not broken. Perhaps I am only waiting to begin again." Daniel smiled. "That sounds very human of you." The firelight flickered, casting their shadows long across the stones. For the first time, Lyra did not feel ashamed of needing someone. She felt alive. Later, as they lay near the fire, the old memory of her desperate order returned again. It no longer hurt her as it once did. Instead, it reminded her of the moment she had chosen life over pride. She turned her head toward Daniel, her voice soft in the dark. The sky grew dark far too quickly. The air thickened with a strange, heavy silence. Lyra felt the change first, her sharp alien senses warning her of danger. She stopped on the open plain, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "What is it?" Daniel asked, stepping up beside her. She raised her hand toward the black clouds rolling in fast. "A storm. The worst kind. We must find shelter." But the land stretched endless in every direction. Only white snow and biting wind, no caves, no forests, no rocks tall enough to block the fury that was coming. The storm hit before they could prepare. The wind roared like a beast, hurling icy knives against their faces. Snow blinded them, cutting the world into spinning white chaos. Daniel stumbled, forward, clutching his pack tight. Lyra grabbed his arm, dragging him through the screaming cold. "Keep moving," she shouted, her voice almost lost in the storm. They pushed against the gale, step by step, each breath a battle. The cold was alive, clawing at their skin, sinking into their bones. At last they found a hollow in the ground, just deep enough to crouch. Lyra forced Daniel down beside her, using her cloak to shield them both. Snow piled around them, threatening to bury them alive. Daniel's teeth chattered violently. His face was pale, his lips blue. Lyra pressed close, wrapping her arms around him, but even together the cold felt endless. "I can't," Daniel whispered, his voice weak. "This storm, it'll take us." Lyra shook her head fiercely. "No, do not say that." His eyes met hers, heavy with exhaustion. "You don't understand. On my world, when someone leaves, when they move far away, you can't always bring them back. Sometimes distance wins." Her heart ached at his words. She thought of her people, faces she still longed for, voices she still missed. They had moved away from her, not by choice but by exile, and she had not found a way back. The distance between them felt endless. For a moment, despair swallowed her. Perhaps she would die here, buried in the storm, never able to tell them she still cared, never able to reconnect. But then she looked at Daniel, this fragile human, shaking in her arms, refusing to surrender even as he confessed his sorrow. He had kept walking beside her all this time. He had given her hope when she had none, and now he was fading. Her chest tightened with fierce determination. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Exile is not the end. Distance is not the end. I will not let it be." She pulled him tighter, her body shielding his. "You once told me humans keep trying, even when everything is lost, even when hope is gone. I will do the same." Daniel's weak smile flickered. That's very human of you." The storm raged on. Lyra pressed her face into his shoulder, whispering words she had never dared to speak aloud. "I still care. For them. For you. I do not know how to reach them. I do not know how to reach you, but I want to. That is enough for now." Her words carried through the storm, not as a shout, but as a vow. She forced herself to move, even when every muscle screamed. She built a barrier of snow around them, shaping it into a crude wall. She rubbed Daniel's arms and legs, keeping his blood flowing. She kept whispering to him, her voice a fragile thread of warmth in the icy void. Hours passed. She did not let herself stop. At last, the storm began to weaken. The wind slowed. The snow settled. The world grew quiet again. Lyra's body shook with exhaustion, but she was still alive. Daniel stirred, his breath steadier now. He opened his eyes, weak but alive, and met hers. "You didn't give up," he whispered. She shook her head. "Because you taught me not to." For a long moment they just looked at each other. In that silence, the distance between them finally began to close. They crawled from the hollow, emerging into a world buried in fresh snow. The storm had passed, but the memory of it clung to them both. The moment when despair almost won, and the choice that pulled them back. That night, they built a fire from frozen branches and shared the last of their food. They sat close, not from desperation this time, but from choice. Lyra thought again of her people. The distance was still there. She still didn't know how to reconnect, but now she believed she could try. If humans could keep walking into storms, then so could she. Daniel poked at the fire and smiled faintly. "See? Told you. We're stubborn creatures," she smiled back, her voice soft but certain. "So am I." And as they lay down in the glow of the flames, she whispered once more, with no shame, only memory and hope. The storm had ended, but the memory of it stayed heavy in their bones. For 2 days, Lyra and Daniel moved slowly, their bodies weak from the struggle. The world was quiet now, buried under new snow that sparkled faintly in the pale sun. They found a cave with walls of dark stone. Inside, the air was still, a gift after so many nights of cutting wind. Daniel gathered sticks, while Lyra struck sparks with her knife until the fire came alive. The flames filled the cave with warmth and light. For a long time, they just sat there, letting the heat soak into their tired limbs. Neither spoke. Silence was easier than words. Yet in that silence, something had changed. Lyra looked at the human across the fire. She remembered dragging him through the storm, holding him when he nearly slipped into death. She remembered whispering, her truth, that she cared. Though she did not know how to bridge the distance between her heart and the people she had lost. She had thought those words would vanish in the storm's roar. But now, in the quiet cave, they lingered between them, alive and real. Daniel broke the silence first. His voice was soft but steady. "When the storm was at its worst, I thought it was the end. But you didn't stop. You kept me alive." Lyra lowered her eyes. "You once told me no fate is final. I wanted to believe you. So I fought." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's the thing about humans. We keep walking forward even when the ground breaks under us. And now, I think you've become more human than I am." The words startled her. "I am not human." "No," he agreed. "But you carry the same fire." She looked into the flames, watching them dance. Fire was fragile, yet it could outlast storms if protected. She wondered if her heart was the same. That night, as they lay near the fire, the silence between them felt different. It was not a wall. It was a bridge waiting to be crossed. Lyra spoke quietly, her voice uncertain. "When I think of my people, I feel distant. I want to reach them, but I don't know how. The exile is a shadow I cannot step out of." Daniel turned his head toward her. Maybe the first step isn't going back. Maybe it's learning not to walk alone anymore. His words touched something deep inside her. She thought of all the nights she had survived only because he had been near. She thought of the storm, the cave, the laughter they had begun to share. Perhaps exile was not the end. Perhaps it was the beginning of something else. The next day, they began to travel together in true partnership. Daniel showed her how humans marked paths with simple signs, stones stacked in patterns, branches bent just so. Lyra showed him how to sense shifts in the wind, how to hear danger in silence. They argued sometimes, but their arguments ended in laughter more often than anger. Once, when Daniel slipped again on the ice, Lyra caught him before he fell. She smirked, saying, You stumble too much. He grinned back, answering, and you catch me every time. Each small moment wove them closer together. The distance between them shrank, not by grand speeches, but by steady steps. At night, their fire became more than warmth. It became a symbol, fragile yet alive, a thing they protected together. They sat close, telling stories of worlds far away. Daniel spoke of Earth, of oceans so wide you could not see the end, of deserts where the sun burned instead of snow. Lyra listened with wonder, her heart aching at the thought of places where exile might mean nothing. When her turn came, she told him about her city, towers of crystal, songs sung at dawn, traditions she had once loved before they turned against her. Her voice broke when she